I've been listening to myself. I hope you feel verbose, talkative. They've been hearing from me this whole time. So we want to hear from Malati this morning. Barbara said, "We're different in personality." I said, "Yes, we are." But he's very stoic, very observant. He's like a personal camera. He'll see everything inside of you. So I want to wish Yadavar, if he's watching or filming or whatever, a very happy birthday as well. You're so nice to celebrate mine yesterday. It's very touching. I want to thank Ladini. Ladini probably now is running around, getting tickets, printing out things. This is what we're used to in devotional service. Prabhupada told me, devotional service, Krishna consciousness, doesn't always mean peace of mind. Just like the gopis were anxious, how can we please Krishna? So we also feel that way, especially when Prabhupada we're serving. It's not always peace of mind. Most of the time we're just finishing off our building or whatever just before Prabhupada arrived. I remember in Vrindavan we were shellacking his desk and praying that it would dry before he got there so his elbows wouldn't stick to the table, and somehow or other it just dried right on time. But it was this kind of interaction that is devotional service. It isn't always peace of mind. It is, how can we please our spiritual master, or Radha and Krishna? People would say, how did you do all these things in London? They'd ask Shamashundar, how did you do all these things? They'd ask me, how did you do all these things? And I simply say, I just wanted to see Prabhupada happy. I wanted to see his smile. And I very much want to thank Mandakini. She's always been there for me. So, we're still having this theme of how we came to London and how it transpired. And I have a few things to say, but I would very much like to hear from Malati, because I've been hearing myself for days. And as much as you feel comfortable, I'd like to hear from you.
Namaste Thank all of you so much for this extraordinary and very ecstatic endeavor to glorify their Lordship Sri Sri Radha-Londonishvara and His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada. I was going over in my mind some of the questions that are asked at various times on various occasions. And a typical question is quite often, well, what is the most important thing you learned from Srila Prabhupada? And then sometimes they may say, at this particular time, place, and etc. But I think every moment with Srila Prabhupada was an extraordinary lesson, just being in his presence. But he certainly instructed us in many ways during his time with us. And one of the most important lessons and principles that guide my daily life I learned from him in London, not in London exactly, but in Bhaktivedanta Manor. And that was the importance of Guru Puja. Sometimes there's a lot of things to be accomplished. Devotees have risen early and they have many things to do, so it sometimes seems convenient to skip a certain part of the morning program in order to catch up on rounds or do something else that has to be done in the service of the temple and the devotees. And such was the situation in one of the very early days when we had gathered together at Bhaktivedanta Manor and Srila Prabhupada had finally arrived. There was the Guru Puja ceremony going on, and suddenly Srila Prabhupada stopped the Guru Puja and he asked for the whereabouts of two of his leading men at that time. And he made some comment about their absence. And from that incident, I understood the intrinsic value of being present for Srila Prabhupada's Guru Puja, no matter where you were or what you were doing or what you thought you had to do. Because it is such a wonderful opportunity and occasion to offer your loving obeisances at his lotus feet and reaffirm your vows and your dedication and loyalty to him and his movement that we have agreed to. Upon initiation, we have accepted to serve him like this. So that was one of the London lessons, that Guru Puja is something never to be avoided or overlooked or dismissed as something we can catch up on later. In hearing the wonderful pastimes of Srila Prabhupada in London and various other areas of the world, sometimes it's a little difficult to dissect, just put them in a box in London, because in our service to Srila Prabhupada, many of us were in various places and they all are somehow connected. So we're hearing various wonderful pastimes and occurrences that occurred during these early years in London. And it is my great hope that all of you who are present are hearing these. Sometimes they're very amusing, sometimes very profound, very instructive pastimes, in such a way that you actually become more inspired to continue your service to Srila Prabhupada and his mission. That you're not just for the moment amused or laughing or nodding your head, but that actually within your heart you're feeling a deeper loving connection to Srila Prabhupada. Last night I was reading a small book of Principles of Community by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, and the commentator, His Holiness Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj, he was giving a very nice description of hearing. So hearing shouldn't just be the sound bouncing in on the ear, but actually hearing should be deeply imbibed, internalized within, in such a way that we are moved to act in a certain way, that we will know how to behave. That by this hearing process, that our lives are transformed. So in the same way, by hearing about Srila Prabhupada, hopefully our lives will be somewhat more transformed as the days go on. The memories, the recollections, one other thing, because today is, I found out this, when the curtains opened up, this is the day in honor of the holy name, Sri Krishna Sankirtan. So another small thing that I read last night actually coincides with this. And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was warning about the danger of neglecting the Yuga Dharma, Sankirtan, the Sankirtan Yoga, and particularly neglecting to distribute it to others in the form of Harinam Sankirtan. And the warning was there that if we fail to do this, that whatever little bhakti we have trying to sprout in our hearts will dry up, and we may fall down, or even worse, become like impersonalists, denying Krishna's very existence. So sometimes I've actually read where it's thought that the Harinam Sankirtan is maybe not something we can do everywhere anymore because people, they may not understand it or appreciate it. And certainly that is true, which is all the more reason for us to go out there and perform Harinam Sankirtan so that they have the opportunity to find out the glories of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Krishna, and that their hearts can become somewhat softened through the profound vibrations of the holy name. So this is something that I see here in London throughout my many years of visiting, that there's been a consistent Harinam accompanied by book distribution. So all glories to London Yatra for keeping alive these very basic principles and instructions. When Srila Prabhupada arrived in London, he arrived because we had finally obtained the building. Our first long months here, as has been described in many details previously, were months in separation. Separation from Srila Prabhupada, separation from the rest of the movement, which was just sprouting in USA and Canada, separation from our God brothers and God sisters. And at the same time, as the movement was growing in USA and Canada, even though we were separated, even though we didn't even have a building, somehow or other, through the power of the holy name, through Harinam Sankirtan, some young men and women had stepped forward and entered our little group. So the main objective for us was to get a building, to get a temple for Srila Prabhupada. But of course temples mean devotees, so Krishna was actually sending the devotees before we got the temple. And that was actually a very wonderful thing, because had we got the temple first, it would have been very difficult for us to manage without the devotees. So Krishna just like when Krishna comes, he doesn't come alone, he brings his entourage. In fact, before he arrives, he is sending his parents and different strategic personalities. So in the same way, many people were attracted and were joining prior to actually even establishing a permanent center. And then when Srila Prabhupada finally came, we had the building, but the building wasn't ready to be inhabited. And so we had no place for Srila Prabhupada, and at that point we were welcomed to the Lenin estate to live for some time at Tittenhurst with whoever happened to come along. So in those days, many devotees would go to London to work on the temple and also to perform Harinam, and sometimes people would follow them back. They would come maybe because they heard we were living at John Lennon's. That was perhaps we'd say a drawing card. But some of them were just fatigued with material life, and they were happy to give up the struggle for existence and join a group of smiling, happy, dancing and singing young people like them. Yesterday we were discussing the cooking pastimes, which were actually really, with Jamuna, if you think about her original cookbook, which is in itself like the Srimad Bhagavatam of devotional cookery, there was just scratching the surface. So that was really wonderful. When we were at the Lenin estate, preparing to get ready to come back into London, devotees joined not only from UK, but devotees were coming from Germany and other places to be with Prabhupada, because wherever Prabhupada was, that was kind of like the strong magnet, pulling people, pulling devotees. And the actual living arrangements were that we were living in converted, it was like had been a stable, but had been converted into little living units, isn't that right? And so we had, Prabhupada had his little unit, and the rest of us were distributed into the other various units. And there was a really beautiful temple room. It was like a small cathedral, beautiful wooden walls and floor, a chapel. And as was described yesterday, we had our morning program there. And the first initiation and marriage ceremony in the United Kingdom also took place in that little chapel. And I remember were the 6 devotees that joined us like priesthood, was that where they were the initiated?
Kulashikar.
And yeah, Kulashikar, Vijay, and
Pritha.
Vijay, Kulashikar, Vishaka.
Jimmy Doody, did he come?
He was already an initiated. Anyway, I was trying to remember those devotees, those early devotees who took their diksha at that time. When we were still living in the warehouse on Betterton Street, a few little brave souls straggled in to join us. And those devotees were kind of the early backbone of the yatra. I don't know if any of them are here now. Kulashikar, Digavijay, Tirthapada, those are the ones that come to mind. And then the early Vishaka, not the one that's here now. And, huh? Yeah, he came a little later at the Berry Place on the Betterton Street front. And then Pritha, Vishaka. These were like the early ones. And then when we moved out to Lenin's, Draupadi and Dhruvananda, that was her son, and Devadatta, her husband, joined. So slowly like this, the yatra was building up. And then we were having our programs in Conway Hall. And from that series of programs, going from Ascot into London, we gained 3. You know, it was 3 for the price of 1 because the three triplets joined, and from that, Radha-Londonishvara got their longest serving Pujari, Leela Shakti Devi Dasi, and then her 2 sisters. One of them married Krishna Das, who was American, and the other one married Sudajaya, who was French. So these 3 girls who were here as something like nannies, they were doing some kind of domestic work. Au pair, yeah, au pair. It's like a nanny. Doing domestic work. They came to these programs and their life was just, you know, shifted gears. And in the same way as when we finally came back to Berry, when we finally were able to come into London and inhabit Berry Place, then other devotees who are still with us, like Mondakini. Mondakini came with, you know, the 2 other girls, Ilavati and Jyotirmayi, and Yogeshwara came at that time, you know, so there was a lot of action going on. Krishna was filling the ranks, and many of these devotees are very strategically active today and serving Srila Prabhupada's mission in very wonderful ways. On that first initiation in the Tittenhurst, there was also a marriage that took place. The couple came. There was Devadatta and Draupadi with their son Dhruvananda. So they were doing what most Tippis did in those days. They were just living together. So Srila Prabhupada, of course, one of the things he changed in our lives was, you know, some of our patterns of behavior. So getting married was kind of a big step for hippies in those days because we didn't believe in that activity. But Srila Prabhupada's very simple prescription, the 4 basic rules and regulations, were accepted. When we accepted Prabhupada, then we accepted to change our lives. So they also accepted to get married. And we were there in the little chapel, and then he looked up. I was holding their son. He goes, "Oh, the boy is here." He goes, "The child should not be here at the parents' marriage." Because generally the child comes later. So I scooped up Dhruvananda and I left the room with him. But that was, it was kind of one of those sweet moments where Srila Prabhupada was, you know, the Vedic principle meets the Western lifestyle, and how he very gracefully handled it, without, you know, condemning or chastising anybody, just letting us know there was a little anomaly here and how to resolve it. So many things like that would occur. One of the other, I'm just skipping a bit because I didn't have time to do my own kind of hectic schedule, chronologize things, so I'm just going to give some memories that I have with my personal interactions with Srila Prabhupada in the UK. A few of them anyway. One that was interesting was when he was living in the apartment on Baker Street. Again, Berry Place wasn't ready, so we had to find a place where he could reside. He wanted to be in town closer to the action, And also, you know, by having his presence in town closer to the action, he was hoping the action would speed up and that, you know, perhaps things would get done a little sooner. So he had this apartment on Baker Street, and it was near Madame Tussauds Wax Museum, I remember that. And some of us were living scattered hither and thither, and myself, and at this time Ishan and Vibhavatid were with us, and Draupadi and Devadatta, we were so grihastras, and we all had little children, little babies or little toddlers. So we had a flat that we shared somewhere in Golders Green. And my service at that time, Jamuna mentioned how Tamal, who was also there, pulled her from cooking for Srila Prabhupada so that she could attend to getting things ready in the temple, specifically with regards to deities. So I was called in to resume the cooking. And that meant arriving early in the morning before breakfast. Cooking and cleaning, both things would go on. So I would arrive early in the morning prior to breakfast to set up things and prepare for the day with Srila Prabhupada. And I would either take an underground, or sometimes Trivikram Brahmachari at the time, he was doing a lot of driving. He would do our shopping, and he would take devotees out for Harinam Sankirtan in different parts of town. So sometimes he would come and he would bring me and drop me off. And my daughter would stay back with the other devotees. So one day when I came up, and I don't really remember the floor, but it wasn't the ground floor, it was maybe 1 or 2 floors up. It was for us it was quite a nice building. In retrospect, I'm not sure how nice it really was. It's just that in those days our lifestyle was so minimal that something that was slightly above it, we would, rate it very highly. But then, sometimes when you go back and you see some of these places after, a few years, even I went to the place where I grew up a couple of years ago. I asked my mother, I was visiting her, I said, well, let's just drive by that house. And, you're a little kid, so your house seems really big, but now I'm grown up, and it was just like a little tiny place. It just didn't seem so impressive at all. So I'm not sure really how nice it really was, but it was much better than anything that we were used to dealing with. It was furnished, however, and I remember we took all the furnishings out of the room that Srila Prabhupada would use as his main work area and also sleep. We put it all in one, like the front room, what we say in America, the living room. I'm not sure what you call it here. So everything was jammed in there, including a television. The floors were carpeted, and even the hallway, like when you would get out of the elevator, there was a carpeting in the hallway too. And I'm mentioning this just because it means you wouldn't hear anybody coming or going. So I walked up to the room, to this apartment one morning, and I noticed that the door was just slightly ajar. And for some reason, seeing the door slightly ajar, because it was usually closed, I would, knock and Purushottam would come and open the door. So the door was a little open, and for some reason it made me feel somewhat hesitant, or, was something wrong. I was wondering why was the door like that. So I was pausing and, considering, so I hadn't knocked on the door yet. And all of a sudden I heard my name, Malati, Malati, come in, come in. It was Srila Prabhupada. So how he knew I was there, psychic intervention, I don't know, but he knew I was there, and he was calling me, and he said, come in, come in. We're watching television. So I walked in, and everything's jammed, all the furniture in that room with the TV. There they were, Prabhupada, Purushottam. Actually, Dhananjaya might have been there at that point, or someone else was there. And he goes, yes, we're watching television. They say they're going to the moon. Let us see. So then, of course, I had to prepare breakfast, so I was kind of in and out of the room. But then finally, the big moment, came. And I think that it had already gone up, the landing part, so-called. Anyway, that happened. Prabhupada's looking, and he goes, all right, turn off, turn off. He said, the idiot box has made idiots out of us. And then he just said, very simply, just very casually, they did not go to the moon. That was it. And, Prabhupada said it, I accepted that immediately. I mean, after all, you're just seeing something on a little box, who knows where the source is really from, But Purushottam was he was disturbed by that. And, he was like pushing, but we just saw that, we just saw that. And Prabhupada just kind of looked at him like, and he said, they did not go to the moon. That was it. Interestingly enough, years later, like 20, 30 years later, I saw an article in a newspaper. I was just at a gas station getting some gas, petrol, and they had a newspaper, and it said, they did not land on the moon. It was a headline, and it was an article by one of the astronauts that had been on the plane, and then some other NASA scientists. And they gave some very specific evidences why actually that whole thing was staged, and that they did not go to the moon. And some of the practical information they offered was that there was, on the picture there was no shadows, because of the lighting. But had they been on the moon, there wouldn't have been any artificial lighting. We know from the Bhagavad Gita, they're self-illuminated. So there would have been some shadow. That was one thing. And then the other was that there were no footprints. And it showed the guy the first step on the moon, so it had that one foot in the moon. But when he would get out of the spaceship, he would have had to he didn't just jump down and stand there. So there would have been some footprints. So there was the sand was completely smooth. And then he showed the picture. He said, if you look way in the back, if you look way in the back, you'll see this big apparatus, like some kind of anyway, it was a big apparatus, like a light stand. It was holding the lights that were illuminating the staging area, which was somewhere in New Mexico or Nevada. So, and others have since come forward and said this, because at the time the United States was in big competition with Russia. We were mentioning the fact that the climate at that time between Russia and America was what they called the Cold War. But everybody was afraid, like anything, it would erupt into a real war. And the Russians had sent up their Sputnik, and now we had to do something. They got there first, they got into outer space first, so we had to do something really marvelous to trump the Russians. And so this is, what they came up with, but Prabhupada could see right through it, and just completely dismissed it. And so that was very nice. Then when the prasadam was brought in, he made some remark about the fact I had made some kachoris, and he said that activity was, more meaningful, more valuable than all these scientists, the scientists were trying to cheat everybody. But he said just see, she is making kachoris for Krishna. And another lesson I learned there, however, was a very interesting one. Outside the door, it's interesting because there were certain standards that Srila Prabhupada gave us that we, you could say, religiously adhered to in these early days. And one of them was a very high standard of cleanliness, which even ourselves we sometimes didn't even, understand or know how to enact. So there was a little small table, just a very small table outside the door of the apartment, and the delivery person for the milk person would pick up the bottles from the previous day and deposit the fresh bottles. And as it happened one day, I had the bottles from the previous day, and somehow the milk had arrived, so bottles didn't get picked up. So I'm coming back with the bottles, and I have the fresh milk in one hand and the old bottles in the other hand. And he made some remark like, just see, she does not know cleanliness, and pointing out that I was holding the clean milk, the unoffered milk in one hand, but these bottles, which had actually been rinsed out, but they were considered used or unclean, in the other hand. Now, in the Western mindset, they weren't touching. They were, I didn't see any cross pollution going on. But Srila Prabhupada saw this and pointed it out. So how many times do we, thinking, without thinking, we have the offered item and the unoffered item, But this was one of those incidents, what for me was very, because I was the object of the lesson, that I didn't forget. At the same time, I see nowadays, and trying to, pass that on, that somehow the what I call the fast food lifestyle is kind of all-pervading. So it's kind of inconvenient sometimes to actually act according to that principle. It's just easier to do things in a certain way. So there's a resistance to certain types of lessons that we receive from Srila Prabhupada. But the strength and purity of the Hare Krishna movement really depends upon how well we accept, understand, and then actually imbibe through our actions the lessons and the teachings that he has given us. So much so that we have, maybe not over here, but I know other places there's quite serious discussions about the 4 rules and regulations. So, the 3.5 rules, or the 3 rules are, considered acceptable. But Srila Prabhupada never compromised. Yesterday there was a little interview with a newspaper reporter upstairs, and it was pointed out to her that there were certain, you could say, core principles or core values that we adhere to that will not change according to time, place, and circumstance. What will perhaps change is how we understand them and, adapt to them, but the actual principle itself will not change. But because Kali Yuga is so relentless and without any mercy, even the minds of the devotees become bewildered. So we need to be really careful and really pray to Srila Prabhupada to keep us on track so that we don't become deluded and thus delude others. One of the other comments by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta was that he is explaining how the path of auspiciousness does not depend upon the countless opinions of other people, that we shouldn't matter what other people are thinking. He said actually this is a sign of the neophyte mentality, that we should be concerned with understanding the teachings of the Vedas and how to act according to those principles. So this is what Srila Prabhupada has offered us, this wonderful standard. And he's himself a very extraordinary teacher. When Srila Prabhupada first arrived, there were not, you can say there wasn't any other competition. We can put it in a kind of modern language. But there weren't other organizations that were promoting Harikatha or Mahamantra chanting or Bhagavad Gita, Bhagavatam. We really were, out there alone. And if you went to the bookstores, you would see Bhagavad Gitas, many, as Prabhupada would point out, many versions, many translations. But without exception, all of them were tinged by Mayavadi impersonalism, denying Krishna's existence as God, denying Krishna as a person. So Srila Prabhupada was really like cutting edge in what he brought to us. It was like really revolutionary, that God is a person as we are a person, and that we all have a unique person-loving relationship with him. So he was standing alone for a very long time. And then gradually, as is natural, if you're doing something wonderful, there will be imitators, there will be followers, there will be others to pick up on it. And after all, Lord Chaitanya said, my name will be chanted in every town and village. So it's not surprising that there are other groups, other mats that are promoting the Yuga Dharma and bringing the teachings of the Vedas forward. So how can we distinguish ourselves? just as Prabhupada distinguished himself through his strict adherence to the teachings of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, that many times he would say, if there's anything that I have done that is special, it is that I have not deviated even a bit from the instructions of my spiritual master. So we also have to be able to recognize this and be careful that we do not see Srila Prabhupada in a mundane way, just like we are warned that we should not minimize the orders of the spiritual master, nor should we see the spiritual master as an ordinary person. These two things can very much impede the strength of our chanting. So Srila Prabhupada still stands alone, even though there are so many other acharyas and teachers who have come forward. And he's distinguished by his essential adherence to the instructions of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, and by the fact that he was able to accomplish and achieve what no other previous and current acharya has been able to do. And that is spread the Harinam Sankirtan movement beyond the shores of India and, in fact, worldwide. That those who have come after Prabhupada's presence are perhaps doing similar activities, but these activities are a shadow of the success of Srila Prabhupada, who actually opened the curtains and flooded the stage and beyond with the message of Lord Chaitanya. And he did this in such a wonderfully profound way, not to establish himself, but certainly by doing what he did, he was established as a premier acharya, not just, another picture in the disciplic succession. That in order to do this, he had to be specifically empowered. And it's explained in the Chaitanya Charitamrita that one cannot spread the holy name, one cannot spread the Yuga Dharma unless they are empowered by the Supreme Lord. So as such, Srila Prabhupada is recognized and accepted not only by ourselves but by a far greater audience as Sakya Vaishavatar, are a personality who's empowered to perform a specific activity on behalf of the Supreme Lord. So when we were preparing to come to London, there was some questions that were asked back and forth, and I remember one of the questions was concerning the statement of Lord Chaitanya that since Lord Chaitanya was God, he could have very easily opened the floodgates and inundated the entire world with Harinam Sankirtan, with the holy name. So, in which case, why didn't he do that? And Srila Prabhupada, in an almost very shy demeanor, said, because he wanted to leave something for me to do. But alluding to the fact that he was empowered to perform this activity. And in the same way, he empowered us through his instructions to carry on this movement. And the first time that he actually even really specifically said that to us was in San Francisco, following his heart attack when he was going to return to India to recuperate. And up until that point, there's two little storefront temples. Really, this is a small temple, and those little storefronts were, somewhat smaller. And we weren't thinking of ourselves in terms of an international movement. I remember once when Mukunda came and we finally got our incorporation papers for San Francisco. It's an International Society for Krishna Consciousness, and I was thinking international, it's New York, San Francisco. But Srila Prabhupada, he definitely had some, a bigger and broader vision. So he was going to return, and we were just thinking of, Swamiji and his boys and girls, just this little handful, less than 50 of us. And he charged us with, in my absence, go on pushing this movement. And more than one of us was struck. The movement. We're in a movement, and now we have to push it on. It was very profound to suddenly have that realization that up until that time there was just this. We hear the family atmosphere. Well, families are just usually limited by their name and their location. So we were in a family atmosphere, and that the New York family, the San Francisco family, and the little tensions between them, because the New York family thought the San Francisco family stole Swamiji from them, and the San Francisco family didn't want him to go back to the New York family. So these little sweet tensions were there. But now he's telling both families to push on this movement, and we're realizing that our little storefronts are maybe not the beginning and end of what we're doing. So Srila Prabhupada had this broader vision. He was able to communicate it and inspire others to carry it on. And to that end, then, 6 young men and women and a 6-week-old baby got on a plane with a one-way ticket and came to the United. Well, we didn't come exactly here. We landed in Holland, and then 2 by 2 took that ferry boat over. But, we didn't have credit cards, we didn't have cell phones, we didn't have laptops, and we didn't have email. And we didn't even have volumes of books. We had no printed matter, we just came with his order. But by dint of that order, which was so strongly embedded in our heart, it seems like we were successful. But we never took any success as something we had done. We always understood to this very day that it was the desire of Srila Prabhupada that was carrying the yatra, that was inspiring the devotees who would come, both in the past, in the present, and in the future. And so it shall always remain. And if we can build on our relationship with Srila Prabhupada, this movement will definitely grow and continue to remain strong. Any of you want to say something?
You've kindled a lot of things for me to say. But before I do, Mukunda Maharaj just sent a message that he misses us, and that he's about to retire to take rest, but let's give some 3 Haribols for Mukunda Maharaj.
Mukunda Maharaj ki.
Now, do you remember what Prabhupada said about people underneath the ground in Baker Street? Something? Adages said, when the elephant caravan passes, the dogs will bark. Regarding the idea of us doing the devotional service, one of the nice leelas is the leela of Lord Krishna lifting Govardhan Hill. At one point, the hill tottered, and everybody, the cowherd boys and girls, put their sticks and their staffs on the hill to help keep it balanced. This is a special leela because it was a chance for us to seemingly assist Lord Krishna, but it's also special because they had the chance to have an unending gaze on Lord Krishna for, I think, 7 days. regarding the moon, it was really very unfortunate that Purushottam would just leave when he had so much association with Srila Prabhupada. I think it was really a poor decision on his part. There's an anecdote about the moon. They were doing these tests in New Mexico because it looked like the moon. All these outcroppings from the earth looked like supposedly what the moon looked like. So in World War II, the Navajo, the Dine, actually they're Dine, Navajo is a white man's name. The Dine were the code talkers. Nobody could, the Japanese were breaking the codes in the war, so the American army used the Navajo as codes, and they were never broken. So now, later on, in this area, NASA, they were sending a time capsule, supposedly, to the moon. So they asked one of the Dine, the Navajo, to put a message in the time capsule. So the Navajo Dine put a message in the time capsule, and the NASA people said, "What does it mean?" It was in the code-breaking language. No one would say. "What does it mean? We're putting this message in the time capsule." No one would say. Finally, they found one person. They paid him to say what the message was. He was called an Uncle Tom Tom. So they paid him, and he said, "The message reads, 'Watch out for these guys, they'll take your land too.'" So, the story goes on. We left off where we were starting to go to various places for Harinam or for engagements. And one of the places we went to was this personality, S.S. Dewan. He was the High Commissioner for London, and we heard Ravi Shankar was going to be at the High Commissioner's party. So sure enough, this is a chance to crash another party. You have to be bold for Krishna. You know, you can only be kicked out. So we went in the red pickup truck, and we go there, and there's a person announcing people, Lord and Lady Southbury, and Lord Brockway, then International Society for Krishna Consciousness. And Ravi got very animated. He was happy to see us. And this man, S.S. Dewan, also was very happy to see us. Although he was from the Communist Party and essentially an atheist, he warmed up to us very much. And we even left the party for a while to go upstairs, and we had slides, and we were going to show him slideshow, but he said, "No, not now, I have to go back to my party, but can you come in 2 days for dinner?" And we did, and actually we became friends with him, and he even helped in some ways. And planting the seed, later on he became the governor of Calcutta. And we went to visit him in a building that Mahatma Gandhi resided in. And he set up a stage for us to do Harinam Sankirtan. And so the stage was somewhat rickety, and this was one of the wildest Harinams we ever did, for this reason. We were trying to get in touch with a minister, the finance minister of Calcutta, Mr. Mukherjee, because he was a Gaudiya Vaishnava, and we knew that if we could get in touch with him, he would certainly at least become a life member, if nothing more. but his secretaries were not letting us go in. So he happened to be at this Harinam at the governor's mansion. Meanwhile, in Calcutta, some people were coming, interested in Krishna consciousness. There was a young woman who came from a very high society family. And so I was making sure that she was treated right. I was keeping my eye, had people welcome her, women welcome her, be with her, make sure she felt at home, because she was from a very influential family. So now it's the time of the governor's kirtan, and we had a rousing kirtan. Minister Mukherjee jumps up in ecstasy and has a heart attack. So an ambulance came and takes him away. The young society girl, we're having a rousing kirtan, and I'm looking around to see if she's all right, and she disappeared. She fell and hurt her leg, and she fell underneath the stage, so the second ambulance came. So that was the Harinam at the governor's mansion. So when we did the second recording, and George was such a great producer, now we had more devotees. ISKCON was on the trumpet. When we did that, we became more popular. People wanted us to go to many places. So we had an idea. We were living on John Lennon's estate. Let's see if we can attract some more quality devotees. And as you mentioned, that was a very attractive thing. But we just didn't say, oh yeah, come on, John Lennon's estate, anybody. You had to screen people, and this was the plan. I would like, in a job interview, we put out the word in Notting Hill and various hippie hangouts. If anybody would like to come and live on John Lennon's estate and help work there, and also live with the Hare Krishnas, please apply. So out of that came Jai Hari, a great devotee. I hope he might show up, but Jai Hari, and actually I accepted 5 people, and 3 out of the 5 came, and they became good devotees. I met one of the other 5 in Amsterdam a few years, many years later, and he was kind of morphing my face. He said, you look familiar. And he said, did you ever wear yellow robes? So I said, yes. So he said, is your name Gurudas? And I said, yes. He said, remember when you were living on John Lennon's estate and some people came? And well, I was one of those, but I couldn't stay. I needed my sense gratification, but it was a good thing to do. So we were going on tours to many places, and we also went on Top of the Pops. And at that time there were only 3 channels, television, 2 or 3, ITV, BBT1, BBT2 maybe. So Top of the Pops was a very, they had a captive audience of the whole demographic of England, old, young. So the first time we went on Top of the Pops, we had slides, everything like that. We had our instruments. We were a band. We had it down, but we were lip syncing. We weren't doing it live, but we had our instruments. And when we started, they put up these cages for go-go dancers to dance behind our kirtan, gyrating. So like Prabhupada, I said, this won't do. So the man says, no, we have to do this. They're paid. It's like union scale. They have to dance. So Chaitra Guru entered us, and we got these bolts of cloth and made them like saris. And the girls taught them how to wrap them. And then, instead of in the cages, they went out in front, and we taught them the Swami step, or the trance dance. They loved it. They loved it. They didn't have to do all that work. They were like sheaves of wheat in the wind. Oh, they loved it. And everybody was happy, especially George Harrison. To him, it was his pride, like we were his children, his project that was working. He said this was one of his proudest moments, to see us on top of the pops. And so we went on some other engagements, and I think I wrote about it in here. It's about the Radha Krishna Temple tour. I just wanted to read because reporters from the British music magazine started coming around the Bury Place temple for interviews. They were sent up to me in my office on the top floor. I would be sitting cross-legged on a cushion across from a part skeptical, part curious interviewer. Question: how long has your group been together? Answer: some of us have been together for a year, and some have joined 2 days ago. So your group changes personnel a lot? Yes, I don't allow our celibate students to go to nightclubs with us for live engagements. We are, first of all, devotees of Lord Krishna. We live simply like monks. These songs are our prayers. Other people like them too. That is why our Hare Krishna mantra is a success. Question: who is the leader of your group then? Oh, my guru, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, is the leader of the group. Which one is he? Because we had the promo 45 cover of the. Which one is he? We're looking at the promotional photo. He is our guru, our teacher. See, we are holding up his photo in our photo. Does he sing too? All the time. He taught us the songs we sing. However, I understand what you're getting at. Yes, he's always with us in our hearts and souls, but his divine grace was not actually in the recording sessions we did with George. Where did the song come from? Oh, the song came from Narada Muni, passed down to us through the ages, stemming from the Satya Yuga, or Golden Age, about 380 billion years ago. Reporter, oh. So we were starting to go all over. Then Prabhupada wanted to go to Amsterdam. We were invited to Amsterdam. So we go to a television studio under the ground. And Prabhupada said there are some people in the future who will never see the sun. And we waited, and we had a very nice program there. But again, they put this dry ice there to make it look mystical. Prabhupada just transcendental. But at the airport, everybody forgot to bring Lakshmi. Nobody had any money. We lost some of Prabhupada's baggage. We're running around.
We didn't forget to bring money, we just didn't have any to bring.
Prabhupada could pull 50 rupees out of someplace. So, we didn't have any money to bring. And so we're running around trying to figure it out, and Prabhupada is so peaceful. That photo of Prabhupada leaning on his cane, and those peaceful photos are from Amsterdam, and we're all running around. And what's also nice...
He was peacefully amused, looking at us running around.
Yeah, and that's not the first time. And the other nice thing about those photos is there's a nice photo of Mother Jamuna sitting right next to Prabhupada. And just like the San Francisco photos for the fire yagya, Prabhupada sitting on the ground, Malati's on one side, Jamuna's on the other. It's not gender specific. They're Prabhupada's daughters. It wasn't this so much separation. They're Prabhupada's daughters, and that's how he treated us. And one time somebody was saying they were wanting Jamuna to be GBC, and they were saying, no, she's a woman, some brahmachari, and Prabhupada said, no, she's qualified. There's no distinction in the spiritual world between men and women. Another time in Vrindavan, some people were talking about Palika and Madri, about not being such great devotees, and Prabhupada said, if you were as good as them, you'd be a great devotee. They did great service. So this is important. In the spiritual world, there's no distinction, and Prabhupada taught us this way. Also, I'd like to praise Mother Jamuna at this point. Such a great devotee, one of the backbones of our yatra for sure. The one flaw of this book is that I mentioned Jamuna, but then it kind of goes off and it doesn't praise her enough. And so that could be rectified. So we're going to different places, and suddenly we became the Beatles at a point, because we were asked, Samashunda and myself, to go to the Ritz Hotel. No, Ritz is in Paris. The Savoy Hotel, right near Piccadilly Circus, to accept the awards for the Beatles. They just didn't feel like going, so they sent us to go. And this was the big music awards. Dave Clark and Lulu and all those folks. The big music award people were receiving awards, and they said, would you go in our place? So Samish and I said, sure. And we went there, but we did I spoke on the Bhagavad Gita. And they said, that's all right. But just to show you what a beautiful person George is, the Paris temple was moving from their hovel to a place on Rue Koch. How do you pronounce it? Foch.
Avenue Foch.
Foch. Very substantial place. And so they were just starting up, and Samarchand and I was thinking, well, there might be a way that, and maybe Mukunda, there might be a way that we can bolster, help out the Paris temple just starting out. George overhears this conversation. So he says, let's go to Paris, help him out. So we go there, and we're at the big, big hotel. High ceilings, gold rococo in the corners. The doors were 12 feet high. Sam Mashinda, George Harrison, sitting at a table with press release material, ready to answer questions, give out information about the Paris temple. My job was at the door, and I was to keep the reporters only 2 or 3 at a time. 2 or 3 at a time only. Well, this lasted for about 10 minutes. They got anxious and they stormed, they broke the doors of the hotel. And even I couldn't stop them. So they're rushing the table. Well, George is used to this. He's a Beatle. He was mobbed all the time. That's one of the reasons they stopped going on tour. George sees this, and he saw that there was a place where they were throwing linen tablecloths in this big hole, this chute that went down to the laundry room. Tablecloths, linens, everything like that. So George bounds up and he dives down the chute. So Sam Mashindo, who's very intelligent, he goes and dives down the chute. Well, I'm holding off the reporters. Now they have nothing to do, so they left me alone. So I dove down the chute. But they had escaped in the car. There was a car that went to the back of the place. So now I'm mobbed. But then they come back and get me. And they take me from the mob. And then we go down the street, and then we're mobbed again by another group. But that was how nice George is. And I can call that We Become the Beatles. Okay, I just want to read one more thing from that Prabhupada wrote to us. Los Angeles, 15th March, 1970. My dear Gurudas, please accept my blessings. I beg to acknowledge receipt of your letter dated 8th March, 1970. At first, I must thank you very much for your slides and the viewer, which I enjoy whenever I find some time. The pictures of London Temple immediately get me there, and I enjoy your company. So I can understand that everything is going on well in London Temple. The service of the Lord should be so nicely executed that Radharani will bestow upon you blessings, raising her right hand palm. You have got a very nice wife, a devotee and intelligent. So both husband and wife combined together, please see that the temple service is being executed regularly and nicely, and thus make your lives happy and successful. Side by side, both of you should train your junior brothers and sisters in the service of the Lord, so that in case both of you go for preaching work, the scheduled program of the temple may not be hampered. He probably had something in mind, like India. We should follow two important lines, namely the Pancharatriki Vidi as well as the Bhagavata Vidi. The Bhagavata Vidi is preaching work and Sankirtan, and Pancharatriki Vidi is temple worship of the deities. The temple worship will keep us sanctified, and when we shall preach in sanctified, pure heart, the preaching will be immediately effective. So we have to follow the two parallel lines simultaneously for successful execution of devotional service. Regarding George Harrison, I'm sure he will improve now in Krishna consciousness. Krishna consciousness is developed only by service, so he has very willingly and gladly served Krishna in many ways. The recent Govinda record, which your good wife has sung along with you, is certainly super excellent. And it has become so nice because of George's attention upon it. So, whenever this nice boy comes to our temple, please receive him very nicely. Give him prasadam, and if possible, talk with him about Krishna, and thus he will advance more and more in Krishna consciousness. When I remember all of you in London, as well as George Harrison, I become very happy because the combination is very much hopeful. I am so glad to learn that George has said, I don't want to make nonsense records anymore. This version of George I consider very valuable. For instance, something in the way she moves, Frank Sinatra said it was the best love song ever written. George actually revealed to us that it was a song to Krishna. And he said, if I said something in the way he moves, they would think I'm a poof. so I don't want to make nonsense records anymore. This version of George I consider very valuable. His popularity and his great talent can be very nicely utilized by producing such nice records as Govinda instead of producing something nonsense. In our Vaishnava literature, there are hundreds and thousands of nice, purposeful songs, and if these songs under George's supervision are recorded, I think it will bring a great revolution in the recording-making business. So, when he says that he does not wish to produce nonsense, this does not mean that he has to close his business. On the other hand, he will get greater opportunity for producing the finest transcendental records, songs which are still unknown to the world. When you meet him again, you can talk with him what I am speaking to you in this letter. My special thanks are due to your good wife, Srimati Yamuna Devi, her singing songs of Krishna consciousness, and Krishna will certainly bless her and you all. Please offer my blessings to all the boys and girls and be happy. You will be pleased to know that Achyutananda is also doing very nicely in Calcutta. He is moving in a very enlightened circles of Calcutta, and somebody is giving us a plot of land worth 80,000 rupees for constructing a temple there. When the temple is constructed, I shall ask you to go there with your wife and preach Krishna consciousness amongst the Indian community. Sometimes you desire to go to India, and Krishna will fulfill your desire to a greater extent. Krishna's service is so nice. Keep the faith always in mind and serve regularly. Your life will be sublime. Hope this meets you in good health. Your ever well-wisher, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami. Cardboard frames.
We were at this point already at the manor, and Prabhupada was staying there, but he was brought in to attend the Rath Yatra. And there was a special seat on the car for him. We had arrived a little bit late, but also initially the weather was quite British, overcast and looking kind of grumpy, you know, a little down. And so there was a desire to kind of delay the departure as long as possible in hopes that the clouds would lift. And on the other side were the bobbies who wanted to see things go according to the time, to the schedule, and they were kind of anxiously pushing for the parade to get going. And we were waiting for Srila Prabhupada to enter, to get on the cart and to sit on the Vyasa sign. So there was this little dynamic. We're waiting for Prabhupada, and the bobbies weren't going to wait for anything. And finally it was, to my recollection, it was like an order. You start now or it's going to be cancelled. And a lot of times when we were in situations like that, and Srila Prabhupada was present, none of us would want to go and, you know, tell Srila Prabhupada, you have to move along now. You know, we would just kind of not say anything, and so then the people who, in this case the police, would get, you know, a little agitated with the situation. So it kind of come to that point, and the devotees then understood we really had to start. And so the kirtan started, and Srila Prabhupada had turned, and he was making obeisances in this fashion to the deities. And we were expecting him, now that the kirtan had started and, you know, slowly the cars were going to be pulled, to take his seat. But after making his obeisances, he turned around and his arms went up and he began to dance. And that really just was like a surcharge for all of us. And simultaneously, you know, it was completely mystical, but the sun burst forth. So the dancing wasn't stationary because we had to move, And so Prabhupada was dancing forward, and the kirtan was getting larger. The kirtan party around Srila Prabhupada was getting larger. And after a few steps, because the sun had come forward, he, while all the time dancing, it wasn't like he didn't stop and take his coat off. He was dancing, but he removed his coat. And I saw that nobody really paid notice that he had removed his coat. They were absorbed in mridungas and kartals and chanting. So I came forward and I put my arm out, and he put his coat on my arm. So then, of course, that gave me license to keep right up close to the kirtan party. And at any moment, it was rather expected that Srila Prabhupada would take his seat. But that didn't happen. He remained dancing throughout the entire procession, all the way to Piccadilly. I mean, sorry, to the Trafalgar Square. And when we came to Trafalgar Square, there was a setup. There was some kind of a Vyasa sign set up so that he would be able to speak and address the crowd. But to get to that Vyasa sign, for some reason, I remember there was these wooden planks. I'm not exactly sure why they were there, but the wooden planks were leading from the cart to the Vyasa sign, which was on some steps at the base of this monument, Lord Nelson Monument. And Prabhupada looked, and there was some hesitation for him to walk on those wooden planks. And again, because of the exuberant kirtan, nobody really noticed this. So I shifted his coat. A few other people had given me their coats too, so I had become the coat person. So I somehow shifted the coats to my left hand, and I put out my right arm. And Srila Prabhupada laid his hand upon my arm, and I started walking with him to the place where the Vyasa sign was. And that was a very wonderful gesture for me that he would accept, that service. But it also is showing how Srila Prabhupada was not turning away anybody who offered to serve him in any capacity. And he encouraged and accepted the service of his daughters equally as much as he accepted the service of the big men who were doing a lot of the heavy lifting at the time in terms of getting things done and spreading the movement and getting the permits and the permissions and the building of the Rath carts. Nonetheless, the women were respected and valued by Srila Prabhupada in all circumstances. And we never felt diminished or left out of any of the activities. We weren't pushed to the back of the room. We were always able to be as close to him as we wanted. And of course, there was the respect coming from our hearts to him that we didn't want to take foolish advantage of this, but we didn't feel shut out. On that particular occasion when he spoke, that was I can remember about 3 times when he made this statement. Well, twice he spoke, and then once in writing when he looked at this Lord Nelson, who has his own column there in Trafalgar Square. And so he paraphrased Lord Nelson. And he said, ISKCON, with all thy faults, I love thee. So this was the paraphrase of, London, England, with all thy faults, I love thee, which was a big statement everybody remembers from Lord Nelson. So Srila Prabhupada paraphrasing him. He made that statement. And he subsequently wrote about that particular Rath Yatra because there was very nice press that came out of that. So in one of the purports in the Bhagavatam, he has made mention of this particular Rath Yatra. and the value of the Rath carts and the value of Rath Yatra. In particular, on that Rath Yatra was glorified by Srila Prabhupada. After the Rath Yatra, I remember that he was taken to Bury, Shamsundar left the room, but he took Srila Prabhupada to Bury Place, and I also came, and Shamsundar had this desire to make a mango drink. I'm not sure if it was lassi or mango milk, but mangoes were really rare to get in those days. Now, with all the global importing and exporting, you can get anything at any time of the year, anywhere. But at that point in time, there wasn't so much importing, exporting, and a mango was just, like a piece of gold. You didn't come across one too often. And somehow or other, Shamsundar had come up with a mango, and he had desired to offer Srila Prabhupada this mango drink after the Rath Yatra. And he did that. He made it himself, and he brought it in. And Srila Prabhupada, he could note with pleasure that Shamsundar had very thoughtfully prepared this preparation. And he was very pleased, very pleased. And then he gave a little description of the gopis and their service to Krishna. He said the gopis were always in competition to serve Krishna, but their competition was not mundane. When one gopi would see that Krishna was satisfied by a particular activity, another gopi also wanted to please Krishna. And the other gopis would be pleased to see Krishna pleased, and then they would also want to do something. He said, in this way, Krishna's pleasure and the gopis' pleasure was ever increasing. So that was a nice way to end the Rath Yatra, and then following that, we took Srila Prabhupada back to the manor.
So, as Prabhupada said, combined with the sanctity of temple life and the preaching process of Harinam Sep Kirtan and speaking about Krishna Katha, this is a perfect two-pronged strategy for bringing the holy name to every town and village. We thank you very much for glorifying us, but this is done. This is in the past. What now? We must continue this. You must feel as adventurous as we felt to want to please Prabhupada, to use your imagination to tweak other people's imagination. Paul McCartney's office is right around the corner. Somebody should be delegated to very nicely bring gifts. Tell them that we're in town even. Whatever. Use your imagination and intelligence. Chaitra Guru to spread Krishna consciousness. It's very nice that we hark back to these things, but that was done. That's done. What now? I don't feel like, oh, I should rest on my laurels and I don't have to do anything now. I feel that every moment, every day, we should try to do something new, as Prabhupada says for Krishna. Do something new, do something innovative, do something bold, with Krishna conscious strength. We want to go out and give this to everyone. The past is the past, the future is the future. Actually, we combine past, present, future to the moment now. And so I really want to impress upon you that these are very nice pastimes, but if we're really going to relish them, incorporate them in your own Krishna consciousness, and, as I say, be bold, imaginative, and enthusiastic. Enthusiasm is the backbone of Krishna consciousness, so you become as excited as we are and we were to spread this Krishna consciousness movement. Thank you.
Srila Prabhupada ki
Jai.
Sri Sri Radha-Londonishvara ki
Jai.
Jagannath Subhadra Baladev ki
Jai.
Sri Sri Gaur Nitai ki
Jai.
Oh yeah, just wanted to say, some people wanted to talk to me about preaching strategy in Colombia and other places, and matchless gifts. Anybody who wants to meet with me, they asked me for a little time. After this morning prasadam, I'll stay here and you can meet with me. Oh, also, Sam Ashinda said, if anybody wants this book, you can also see me.
Gurudas Prabhu ki
Jai.
Malati ki
Jai.
Srila Prabhupada ki
Jai.
So thank you all very much. Thank you both very much, Brother Malati and Gurudas Prabhu, for giving me remind everyone that program this evening will be a gathering of all Srila Prabhupada's disciples at Bhaktivedanta Manor. So we'll be going there this morning for a tour of the school and Goshala and things there. And then the program will be televised here. They'll set up the screen and everything so we can see. There'll also be kirtan and bhajans going on here in the evening so that we don't miss out. And as I had said earlier in the week, all this week Bhaktivedanta Manor has cancelled their morning and evening classes and been televising everything that's going on here out there on the screen. So it's a real nice, nice cooperative mood and sharing of this 40th anniversary celebration. So tomorrow morning, as I said, I think Friday will be a bit full of surprises. So everyone's encouraged to please come and participate. Everything is not 100% settled, so we'll see what happens on Friday morning. Who's here and who's not. That's tomorrow. So thank you very much. Sri Sri Radha-Londonishvara ki Jai. 40th anniversary Mahamahotsav ki Jai. Srila Prabhupada ki Jai. Om Premanandi.